What have we learned from the New York Giants mandatory minicamp? I'll discuss some points coming up next on the LockedOn Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name's Patricia Trana. Thank you so much for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And today's episode is brought to you in part by Blue Nile. Blue Nile can help you make your moments sparkle with jewelry from their extensive collection. And Locked On Sports listeners can get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement rings. So use that code Locked On at checkout at BlueNile.com. All right, folks, on today's show, the Giants have 2 days of mandatory minicamp in the books. We're going to talk about some takeaways, some things that we've learned from the mandatory minicamp, and kind of spin ahead and look at how that might set up the training camp that is coming up. So that is on today's Locked On Giants podcast. Again, happy to have you with us. And thanks as always for tuning in. All right, so let us get right into the nitty gritty here. The first thing I want to talk about is the observations that have been reported, including by yours truly, about the offense and the defense and, which side won, which side didn't. And truth be told, folks, it doesn't really matter at this point who won the daily practices. I know the players talk about, for bragging rights, who won the practice and whatnot, but here's something you need to keep in mind. And I bring this up because I saw a few people, write into me and say, oh my God, the offensive line, here we go again with the offensive line. When I reported yesterday that, the defense was getting some pressure, a little too much pressure on the offense. And I just want to clarify this whole thing for you. The camps right now in spring are non-contact. They are without pads. Now think about this for a second. If you're an offensive lineman, you need to be able to exert a certain degree of physicality against your opponent in order to stop them. In other words, this isn't so much a game of patty cake where you keep, patting the guy away and trying to, bounce him away like a volleyball. You've got to be able to lock onto him. You've got to be able to make contact and get physical. That is the only way an offensive lineman is really going to be able to block out a defender. So think about it. If an offensive lineman is retreating in his pass block set and he's got a defensive player coming at him, going straight ahead, who do you think is going to win that battle most times? Probably going to be the defensive player. So for those of you who were concerned that the offensive line was a problem, that it couldn't protect Daniel Jones or any of the quarterbacks, that's not necessarily the case. I keep telling people, when it comes to these spring practices, take the reports with a grain of salt. And yes, that includes my reports. Take them with a grain of salt. We're talking about what we see. In my case, I'm talking about, how defenders are trying to stunt and do things and, throw certain twists and whatnot in an effort to test the response time of the offensive lineman. But the bottom line is, unless they can lock on and they can grab and push and do whatever they need to do, like you would see in a game, it doesn't really matter if the defense is winning. It's a learning camp. It's a teaching camp. All right. With that said, the offensive linemen, the defensive front did a lot of drills over the course of the 2 days of the mini camp. The offensive linemen, with working on their retreat, their pass block set. There were simulations, obviously using tackling dummies and whatnot. It's not quite the same as going up against live competition, but the bottom line, folks, is they're going to get better. All right. They were also missing, Andrew Thomas wasn't there. And, certain guys were rotating in and out of the quote unquote first team rep, which, by the way, I'll talk about coming up in another segment, but, It was an opportunity for the coaches to teach, and the results weren't going to be perfect. All right. You got to remember that, they were limited to so many hours a day per week, and no contact. So those of you who wrote in who were concerned about the offensive line, don't be. All right, Giant fans, coming up in the next segment, I'm going to talk about why the spring was a really good opportunity for some players and what it means for the team going ahead. So stick around. We'll be right back. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, if you're looking for that special gift and can't decide, or maybe you're just ready to pop the question to that special someone, BlueNile.com has you covered either way. BlueNile.com has jewelry experts on hand 24/7 via phone or chat to help you find the perfect gift within your budget. Or if you're feeling creative and want to do it yourself, use Blue Nile's online tools to create the perfect one-of-a-kind diamond ring. Whatever your occasion, make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com. Locked On Sports listeners can get $50 off purchases of $500 or more with the code Locked On. So go ahead, put your faith in Blue Nile, and know that every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging so that your recipients won't know what is in it. Shop stress-free and find your perfect forever piece. Go to BlueNile.com today, and don't forget that promo code Locked On to save $50 off your purchase of $500 or more. Welcome back, Giant fans, to the Locked On Giants podcast. I am Patricia Traina, and we're talking about things that we learned from the Giants mandatory minicamp, just basically takeaways and whatnot. And, I have some more observations from day 2. I was at day 2. And again, folks, you can check out my Instagram account at Patty Traina, PATTITRAINA. I have videos of interviews. I have videos from the workouts. I'm doing a Q&A over there. So just check that out if you get a chance. Follow me on Instagram. And, I'm trying to bring you some more content in addition to what I bring you here on the Locked On Giants podcast and over on Giants Country, where I will continue to write over the next several weeks until we get to training camp. Before we get into the next item on my list that I want to talk about, we have an important favor to ask of all of our listeners out there. We put together a survey so that we can learn more about our listeners like you and make your favorite Locked On podcasts even better. So this is your opportunity to tell us what you like and what you don't like about the Locked On Podcast Network. So please go on over to lockedonpodcasts.com/survey and take our survey. It won't take you very long, and everybody who completes the survey can qualify to win one of 10 $100 Ticketmaster gift cards. To take our audience survey, again, go to lockedonpodcasts.com/survey. Thanks so much for your help. And thanks so much for listening to the Locked On Giants podcast. All right. What else have we learned, or what can we take away from the Giants mandatory minicamp? And I mentioned at the end of the last segment, the opportunity that is presented for a lot of these young players. Now, I want to talk about this for a second. There were about, I think, 16 or 17 players or so who weren't able to participate fully in the spring workouts and the mandatory minicamp. And a lot of those guys were starters or projected starters. So what that allowed the coaching staff to do is open up opportunities to these other guys and basically give them reps and see what they were capable of doing as far as the fundamentals go. Now, this is going to be important because one of the things last year that drove me crazy with the previous coaching staff is I thought they spent way too much time trying to figure out what they had at the bottom of the roster, as opposed to figuring out, or getting ready, I should say, the top of the roster, the starters. And sure enough, when the Giants went into the season, I think we can all agree that the Giants did not look prepared to start the season. So call it a blessing in disguise, because I don't know if this was necessarily planned or whatnot, but the Giants, I think, in having given guys like, the Richie Jameses and the Travis Toikonins, You know, just, you know, a few of those guys who would normally be at the bottom of the depth chart, giving them some reps. Now, the coaching staff probably has a good idea who can do what. Now, again, it's not with pads, so you're not going to get a full idea, but you can look for the fundamentals and how far along guys are in terms of the fundamentals that are being asked of them, in terms of their knowledge of the plays. You know, can they run the plays without thinking, or are they sloppy? Are they making mistakes? So there are certain things that coaches can definitely take away from in watching some of these guys at the bottom of the depth chart. Plus, now when they get ready to reconvene next month for training camp, and by the way, I believe the dates for training camp, the rookies, I think, are reporting July 19th. The veterans, I think, report the 26th. And then the first practice for everybody would be the 27th. That's the first day of the acclimation period, if I've got my dates right. Anyway, when the players do report back, now the coaching staff, the hope is everybody hits the ground running, and they can balance out getting the team ready while also taking a look at those guys who during the spring showed that maybe they're a little bit more intriguing than people first thought. So really a good approach, I think, because, you know, Dable has spoken about not having a depth chart, but having a rep chart. And that's a big reason why, you know, guys like tight end Ricky Seals-Jones, for example, one day he would be with the ones, the next day he might be with the twos, or on some drills, he might even be with the threes. They rotated guys in and out of the lineup. So there was no depth chart. You couldn't sit there and say the first team offensive line was this look, the first team defensive line was this look. It changed every day. It also changed play by play. So to say, you know, who the starters are at this point, you really can't do it. But it was a good opportunity, I think. And I think the coaches did a really good job of giving guys a lot of opportunity to show what they can bring, given the parameters of the camp. Again, no contact, no pads, but you can look at obviously things like the grasp of the knowledge of the playbook, fundamentals, you know, who's tackling the tackling dummies correctly, who's going up against the blocking sleds by, you know, keeping his hands within the framework of the blocking sled, things like that, you can tell. So I just think, you know, that was a good approach by the coaching staff. Again, I don't know if it was by design or if it was just something that came about, but I have to think that the staff has a better idea now as to where these guys are, so that when they reconvene next month for training camp, they can hit the ground running, which is going to be important, because once they hit that ground running, you know, and I'm talking about obviously after the mandatory acclimation period is done, you don't want to be wasting time. You want to hit the ground running, and you want to get these guys ready to go. So that's something certainly to keep an eye on. All right, Giant fans, we have a few more things on my list to talk about regarding what we've learned from the mandatory minicamp. That's coming up next. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, but without the calories and sugar. Most Built Bars contain about 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein, and they taste great. Built Bar offers 9 amazing flavors in nut and nut-free variety, plus a rotating limited time offering of different flavors that changes up every so many weeks. And they also have a product called Built Puffs, which are absolutely amazing. They're like marshmallow type of candy bars that just are, they taste wonderful, and they're low sugar. They really hit the spot when you need something sweet. So head on over to BuiltBar.com and see what their current flavor lineup looks like, and use our special promo code LOCKED15 to save 15% off your first order. Again, that promo code is LOCKED15, LOCKED15 for 15% off your first order at Built.com. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the LockedOn Giants podcast. I am Patricia Traina. Happy to have you with us on this Thursday. And before I get into the final things on my list that I want to talk about, just a quick programming note. I wasn't able to coordinate with the entertainer to do a live show, so there won't be a live show tomorrow. As a matter of fact, there won't be a show at all tomorrow on Friday. I'm going to take a day off. I've got some personal things I need to attend to, but I will be back on Monday with an all new show. So don't worry, I'm not going far, but, just wanted to let you know in case you're looking for a show on Friday that, wasn't able to set something up. So I'm just going to take care of a couple of things and then I'll be back on Monday with all new shows. So thank you again for tuning in. Let's talk about a few more things on my list, some takeaways. A big takeaway regarding Saquon Barkley. Barkley basically admitted in his presser with reporters that he had lost some confidence with his injury, that he wasn't quite the same player he was coming out of Penn State. Now, if you watched Saquon Barkley last year, you probably saw that. You probably said, at times, gosh, he doesn't look like he trusts his knee. He doesn't quite look like the Saquon that we saw in 2018. And for Barkley to admit that, I thought, kudos to him, because that's really difficult for somebody to get up there and admit that, hey, I wasn't quite the same. But it just shows you that Barkley is in touch with, what's going on with himself. He's aware, and he's also holding himself accountable. He could have sat up there and made all kinds of excuses, and he didn't. So, now he's talking about obviously wanting to have a big year. And certainly, the fact that the coaches have been using him more in space during the practices, that's something that Barkley definitely agrees with. He spoke about how he likes being out in space and how he feels that he could be at his best out in space. So another reason to like the coaching staff, how they're, tailoring what they're doing to the strengths of the players. But just sticking with Barkley, getting back to Barkley for a minute, I know a lot of people, when I say, he promises or not promises, he's determined to have a good year. And a lot of people are like, well, he's been saying that for the last how many years and it just hasn't happened. To be fair to Saquon Barkley, you have the injuries. There's no question that has been a factor, but you've also had the scheme and the personnel around him. All right. When you had the old coaching staff sending him up the gut into the teeth of the defense on just about every play that he touched the ball, well, no wonder why the man would lose confidence. It's kind of like, if you ask me to play, what's an instrument I can't play? If you ask me to play the trumpet, all right, I can't play the trumpet. And if I tried and still couldn't get it and just said, hey, listen, I can't get this. And you said to me, well, doesn't matter, keep playing it. And I knew I wasn't giving my best, that would frustrate me. It's the same thing with Barkley, asking him to keep running up the gut and do things that he's not really a fit for frustrated him, maybe caused him to doubt himself a little bit. That's all in the past now. And, we talk about, the mental aspect of it. And I think a very underrated thing about this camp, this whole spring, as a matter of fact, is how Brian Daboll and his staff have come in, and they had some guys. I think you can make an argument and say that some guys, maybe a question how they were feeling mentally, were they starting to doubt themselves? Were they on the verge of maybe, being on the point of no return? So for example, you look at Barkley as one who was getting frustrated with his usage. Daniel Jones is another, that poor guy, he hasn't had anything go his way between the offensive line, the change in schemes, and so on and so forth. And, if that had continued, might he have gone the path of, say, a David Carr back in the day when Carr was with Houston? And there were other guys, Shane Zimenez, Darnay Holmes, guys who maybe, started to fade or, just weren't getting the opportunities or had guys in front of them. And you just sat there and they were like, you wondered, were they starting to lose confidence? So this coaching staff, one of the underrated storylines of training camp has been this coaching staff has built up some confidence. And you see it in Saquon Barkley. You see it in a lot of guys. And the way they've done it is through honesty, communication, and tailoring, what they want to do to the strengths of the players' talents. So important, folks. And that's what's going to help build camaraderie. That's what's going to help build a strong locker room. That's what's going to help build competitiveness. And hopefully that's what's going to build wins. All right. So nobody's going to be frustrated. Everybody's going to hopefully buy into what the coaches are preaching. And so far, so good. It seems that everybody has bought it. All right. One last thing I want to talk about is something that came out of Jihad Ward's presser. And boy, I got to tell you, I was so happy to hear this. Jihad Ward is a veteran defensive lineman who was with Don Martindale in Baltimore. And the Giants signed him, obviously, to be, one of those quote unquote unofficial quote unquote player coaches. Jihad Ward has taken it upon himself to help show Kayvon Thibodeau the way. He's told reporters that he's been on Thibodeau's butt, that he has, stayed on him to study the playbook, to take care of himself, to lift, to do all the little things he needs to do to be successful. And you know what, folks, that is so important, because a lot of times when you have a young player or a young room and you don't have that veteran there to kind of show you the way, even though you would sit there and think, well, it's common sense. You got to do A, B, C, and D if you want to be great. A lot of young guys don't realize that. They think that they can get by with what they did in college. And that's not the case. And that's why having a veteran mentor is so important. And for Jihad Ward to come in here, a lot of times, guys will come in and they'll kind of mind their P's and Q's, especially when they're in a city for the first time with a new team and whatnot. I really liked what I heard from Jihad Ward. And he's just one example of many on that roster of veterans who are coming in here and who are not afraid to speak up and show their younger teammates how to get things done. And that's so important. It really is, because you just want these guys, again, to hit the ground running. You want them to be at their best. And sometimes they just need that little push from their veteran teammates. So kudos to the Giants in their roster building process. You can kind of see what the plan was, despite the fact that they didn't have any, major salary cap space with which to work. But we will see if it pays off. I have a feeling it is going to pay off. And, I would say overall, the Giants spring, based on the practices I saw, I would say overall it was a success. Will Brian Dable agree to that? Probably, but, was it perfect? No, but a success. I think you could say that. So what's to come? Well, we'll find out when they get to training camp. And speaking of training camp, in future shows, I'm going to be looking at questions heading into training camp. I'm going to be breaking down the various position groups, the strengths, the weaknesses, biggest questions, what they have to do. We'll talk about the different topics. So those are going to be shows that I'll be doing over the coming weeks. Now, next week, I will be back on Monday with a new show. But also next week, I start my summer schedule here on the LockedOn Giants podcast, meaning I'll have a show for you on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So it'll be that way until we get a little closer to training camp next month. Hope you'll still tune in. All right. We'll just try and keep up and do what we need to do. If we need to do an extra show, we'll do an extra show. But just wanted to give you a heads up on that. So, all right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for me on the LockedOn Giants podcast. Thanks as always for tuning in. And thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Again, no show tomorrow. So have a great weekend, everybody. And I'll see you on Monday.